So I guess the purpose of this session is to maybe, it's not so much to dispel myths, but kick around use cases, I suppose. So both for those of you watching this for the first time, my name is Paul Culmsee. I'm here in Australia and chatting with Chris Huntingford from Microsoft in the UK. Yeah, both metalheads, although I've got my fake background at the moment, but rest assured I have a room that's similar to his that you can see in the background there. Chris comes from the, is it fair for me to say you come from the CRM/CDS/Dynamics/Dataflex, not known as Dataflex anymore world?
Yeah, that's it, 100%.
Yeah, and I come from the Office/SharePoint, pretty much document management, collaboration kind of world. And so this all came about because there's, I suppose there's probably, it's fair to say that there's kind of like the Dynamics camp, and then there's the Office people's camp, and neither of them have a particularly good understanding of the other side. And so rather than sort of contribute to that problem, we thought we may actually see what we can do in terms of unpacking some certain scenarios and seeing, when Office makes sense, when SharePoint doesn't, because this all stemmed, folks, from a conversation we had where I was saying to Chris that I dislike the side-by-side comparison things. They're very tempting and they're very seductive. So it's like where you see in one column it says SharePoint, and the next column it says, say, SQL, and the next column it says Dataflex, and the next column it says Dataflex Pro. And there'll be lots of, pros, not so much pros, cons, but just single line features. And I don't like the idea of making complex decisions based on just sort of following the, therefore this column says this, can't use this option. I think it's a little more nuanced than that. So anyway, we had a conversation where we kicked around some use cases and decided, okay, we might record a few of these where we'll basically play with different use cases, and some of them will show where, for example, SharePoint just sucks royally, and some will show use cases where actually SharePoint makes a lot of sense, for example, and vice versa. And then some use cases might be a bit of a line ball, and there'll be considerations where you might go one versus the other. So rather than presuppose what those criteria are, we'll kick around a use case and say, well, this is an example of one that's actually pretty good. So hopefully dispel a few myths that way. And if you are going to use those side-by-side comparisons, maybe, I don't know, video, this is a bit of a companion piece, something to that effect. You reckon that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to end the great data war.
Yeah, exactly. So
just doesn't.
Yeah, no, well, I'm a bit of a hippie at heart. One of my mentors, his mantra was shared understanding is pretty much most projects fail because there isn't any. And so in this kind of thing, I refrain from making public comments on any of these kind of ideological debates, because a lot of the time I don't actually know, which is why I'm speaking to Chris, because he does in his area of the world.
And I need to learn about the SharePoint side as much as anything. So
yeah, totally. Chris has seen this use case before. I'll share my screen in a second. I'll crank it up and I'll talk through an example of a use case. This one was actually the one that we started with. It was just an example of using SharePoint, but probably in a non-obvious way. So I'll go back and I'll quickly pop that one up. Chris, just give me a second. Let's do the little share screen thing and let's get my browser in the right one. This will do.
I'm actually super excited about this. I love this, Paul. I love this app. It's brilliant.
This is an old app. Hey, this app was done, right in the infancy of Power Apps, but I guess it was the one that convinced me there was a lot to it. The Canvas apps were pretty cool. But so I'll give people the quick background on this one in case they haven't seen this use case from other videos. But this is an organization that is delivering major infrastructure projects. So, when I say infrastructure, I mean it could be roads, buildings, freeways, big construction style projects. And the CEO of this organization, actually I'll back up, it was rail. It's to do with rail projects. There's in this area in Australia, it's a CBD, it's a major, metropolitan area, but a lot of the roads have country style boom gate railway stations. And so just imagine what the traffic is like if you're in the middle of a central business district and you've got the whole gate comes down. So noise, pollution, safety, all of that sort of stuff. So anyway, they're spending just the small sum of $10 billion to actually solve that problem over sort of 5 to 7 years and fixing this up. So that's the background. So you can imagine the audience for this app that I get to is primarily people that are wearing hard hats, goggles, PPE, pretty much gloves, high visibility gear, that sort of thing, and they're out in the field. And they were really interested in knowledge management. They're doing so much work and they capture so many insights doing this work that they wanted to capture them. And if you've ever done a lessons learned in a project, and a lot of people have, but they're terrible when you sit down and think about this idea that, like, a lot of people, literally lessons learned is typing some stuff into an Excel spreadsheet for probably most organizations. And which really is a great way to capture some stuff, but I really don't think anything's learned because of, I don't know, Chris, have you ever actually opened up a lessons learned spreadsheet from some project of, ghosts of project past and gone, wow, that was insightful. I'll do that this time. I just don't think it'll ever happen, right?
No. Well, I'm probably the most guilty party in the world of never, ever, ever doing that.
So, no, seriously, you aren't. It's like, it's a universal problem. So, and knowledge management is kind of an area that's dear to my heart. So anyway, 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, in the infancy of Teams, Power Apps had just come out. And as part of doing a whole big epic knowledge management strategy that covered building communities of practice and building up skills and expertise and documents and all of this, we looked at the idea of capturing lessons. And we're like, well, if these guys are out in the field, using a mobile device makes a lot of sense to capture lessons. And there's no point asking to fill in War and Peace to do so, because at that time, it's not really so much a lesson that it's a thought bubble. It's a bit like this conversation where I'm going, hey, Chris, I've got this app. And I reckon it's a pretty good example of an office scenario, right? And so here's what I've learned about it. And you come away going, oh, that was a pretty good app. I like that. I learned something from that. That's exactly the idea, right? A lot of these lessons are serendipitous. It's a thought bubble, little aha moment you have. So anyway, I guess with that, that's sort of the preamble. So picture this, you might be working on a construction site. Given that this is transport, like it's rail, you do have to actually say that you're in a position of safety, because if you're looking down at your phone using the Lessons Learned app and then got hit by a train, that would be kind of ironic in a sad way. So you go, cool, I am in a position of safety. And to the untrained eye, you might think you're looking at a Yammer kind of clone, I suppose. And you'll see in a second, it really isn't. But this was done pre the new Yammer interface as well. And I'm totally claiming credit for the new Yammer interface. I believe that someone at Microsoft saw what we've done, because when I looked at the new Yammer one, I was like, man, this looks like what we did. But anyway, okay, so here's the basic gist. It is a feed, but it's not a feed in the kind of Yammer way, by the way, because although you're seeing shares and some photos and stuff here, and it is optimized for a mobile phone, I totally get that. But if I was to scroll far enough down this feed, you'll see some other things. Like, for example, here's an alert with a hyperlink, right? And if I scroll down a little bit further, I'm probably going to find a document. I'm sure I'll find one. I think I looked. Yeah, there's one. Yeah, here's some new safety practice. So the point is, this feed takes multiple sources of content. And it also even does tweets as well, certain Twitter kind of handles they follow. But the point is...
scrapes from Twitter, right?
Sorry, what's that?
The scrapes directly from Twitter, right?
It uses Power Automate to do it. So I'll talk to that in a sec, actually. Now, you know how I said this is a $10 billion program of work, right? So there are 5 different major consortiums delivering this work, and each consortium is a few organizations. So there's a lot of orgs. And so these filters, you can actually come in and go, something, I only want to see the stuff from my particular consortium. So you can tweak it. But most people don't do it. Most people like to see the program level feed, every insight, everything that all the different, kind of projects are doing. Because remember, I said this is railway crossing upgrades. There's like 50 of them or something they're doing. So there's probably 5 or 6 going on at any one point in time in different parts of the city. So anyway, that's kind of the feed. And that's not that big a deal. It's more this. Okay, here's the lessons learned bit. You're looking at something. I'm looking at some work you did, Chris. I think, damn, that was a pretty cool way of doing it. I've never really thought about doing that before. So I might share that to the feed. I'm going to share a safety observation. And remember, this is all about safety, right? So, Chris, has good, guitar in background. I don't know, something like that. So imagine you see someone doing something, you take a photo of it, tag up the photos. But this is really where I suppose it deviates from what you'd typically associate with Yammer or Teams, right? Because you then come in and you go, okay, now we're into metadata. So who should we share this with? And you notice these are like disciplines. They're not specific to a project. They're span. So you go, engineers will be interested, and I reckon the safety folks will be interested in this one. And then you can come in and say, what part of the project does this relate to? You know, and you can go, okay, well, it was demolition and excavation. Okay, by the way, I'm not going to click submit. I'll get in trouble if I do that. But anyway, so here's the thing. You submit that. Two things happen. One thing, it comes into this feed, which means everyone else using this app in the program across all these different projects see it. And, you know, if they like it, if it gives them an aha moment, they'll share something or they can comment. Typical social network stuff. But it also, the other thing it does, and there's a lot of Power Automate in here too. You know how I popped up those disciplines earlier where it was like safety, you know, supervisor, safety guy? They're linked to teams or Yammer groups. And so each one of those groups now gets like a conversation starter. This comes through as an adaptive card, and it's called a from the field insight. And you'll see the photo, you'll see the tags and all of that. But each individual community of practice gets it. And the intent behind that is what might be a good idea from safety point of view could be a bad idea from an engineering or a community point of view. You know, like you might make something 100% safe, but if you stop traffic and cause traffic jams, maybe it's not as safe as what you think it is. You know, it just depends on your perspective. So anyway, so now you've got all these discipline communities of practice now having continual insights coming in from the field, and they're looking at it. And that then leads typically to, when you actually do that, a decision gets made. You know, someone will go, no, there's a legitimate lesson there. I like that. We're going to change policy. We're going to change some onboarding procedure, something like that. And that's where the documents come in. So I mentioned there was a document in the feed. You can find any new documents that have been updated in the feed, but I can come down the bottom here. You'll see like there's a safety library link. And if you go, cool, I'll go off to the safety library. This is more or less talking to SharePoint Enterprise Search, and it's just taking advantage of, you know, if SharePoint people will know you can do metadata and tagging, it's not all the world of folders. So you're looking at documents here. So we're exposing SharePoint documents. And so you can come in here, and because it's all tagged properly, I can come into the filter here in the phone and go, there's a whole bunch of different kind of categories here. So I think, you know, the example I always use is, let's have a look at all the safety alerts around the hazard area of asbestos, and you apply that filter, and it basically goes off to SharePoint, says, what do you got for me? SharePoint comes back with this stuff, and then you can click on it, and, you know, on your phone in that kind of experience, you got the content. So this is an example of, I suppose I'd summarize what I just showed you. It's like, it's kind of the continuous improvement loop. If you've ever seen a continuous improvement diagram where there's like, you know, idea, you know, testing, implement the change, you know, and there's this kind of, you know, the implementation of a change kind of leads to new ideas. You know, you see this kind of loop type diagram. This is trying to bring that to life. But the idea is, at the end of this project, you know, at the end of the 5 years, we got this comprehensive safety library all tagged up. We have a whole bunch of safety insights throughout the life of the project. We have a whole bunch of teams, community of practice-based discussions, but we have linkages between everyone. Like I can tell you pretty much the life cycle from when a document got updated, the conversation that led to that update, and the idea that sort of led to that. So that's kind of an example. I mean, I said to you at the time when I first showed you this, like we actually do, this is maybe 40% of the sort of apps we build. And maybe there's a perception, particularly, you know, people who build electronic form, you know, corporate scenarios like lead form or, you know, purchase requisition, something like that. This is quite a different use case. You know, it's quite a high value use case, but it's not the sort of maybe typical one you'd see in a finance organization, something like that. So anyway, that's kind of an example of a SharePoint powered Canvas app that I think actually suits the office world quite well. You know, it sort of plays to the strengths of what the office world can do. There's other features, but I don't really have to go into them. But anyway, there's sort of you know, exhibit A as far as showing what the Power Platform's capable of through that one.
Yeah, I like this, man. I really do. This is by far one of my favorite apps I've seen, and I'm not just blowing smoke. I really do think it's cool, and it's a great use case. Like I come from, so in South Africa, I did a thing called SHEC, which was Safety, Health, Environment, and Quality.
Yep.
And there was a large construction organization that I implemented it for. And this speaks worlds to what you can do with the Power Platform. I mean, if I'd had this type of technology 10 years ago, it would have made my life a lot easier, right? So I'm just thinking back to that project, and we implemented that project in Dynamics. And I tell you what, Paul, we broke a lot of rules, man. You know, we definitely did. And actually, what was interesting was the majority of the project ended up being in SharePoint, not in Dynamics, because of all, because of the documentation. Like that's the thing. It was so the SharePoint piece. We ended up having to do that out the box integration with Dynamics. But man, like this is awesome. This is really cool. If I could give this to frontline workers and people in the field at that time, this would have solved all my problems.
I think this is one where I really did think about whether, like, because we could talk about how this scales and all of that sort of stuff. So if you use this use case as an example, and you can now start to pick, if you like, kind of criteria that might end up in one of those side by side comparisons. This one, it's not like a typical databasey app. We're not querying copious amounts of data. Like, sure, we've got a feed here and you've got a basic filter, but you're not doing any crazy level filtering here. And in fact, a lot of SharePoint people may not even be aware of actually how this was done, because it's actually talking to the SharePoint search API. I'm not hitting lists. I'm not hitting libraries. I'm actually asking search to do the work. And so, and that means and there's a few implications of that, but SharePoint's actually got a phenomenal search engine, and it's a tragedy that people don't actually use it more, because there's many SharePoint sites I've been to, no one makes an investment in search, and yet that's like its core kind of core value proposition, at least in my mind. So yeah, this one uses SharePoint search API, but that's what you asked before, like, do you crawl Twitter? That's exactly right, because in actual fact, the way it's done is SharePoint search can't talk to anything other than SharePoint, right? That's a given, but it obviously can pick up documents, and you can configure result sources where you can go, okay, even though you've got all of SharePoint, you've got all of this stuff, I'm only interested in this particular list and this particular library and any documents with this particular criteria. You can configure that in a result source, and that takes the whole, gamut of SharePoint content from this to maybe this. And so that's what this thing's doing. One of the implications of that, though, is if you share to the feed, it's actually about 2 or 3 minutes before anybody else sees it, because SharePoint's continuous crawl has a bit of a lag. So unlike a database type scenario, where if you basically pump that straight into an entity or a list and then hit the list, you'd get it straight away. However, the SharePoint result source brings the list that has the tweets. It has the library that has the safety stuff. It has the list that has the observations and the good practice. It brings that all into one place. And I can say, just give it to me by date, and it comes through here. It comes in JSON, which means it suits kind of the Power Apps way of doing things. There was very little kind of data manipulation to make it all work.
That's cool.
So I think
this is amazing. No, it's just brilliant. Like, the fact that you're using the search API was the thing that got me in the very beginning when you told me about this, because, like, I mean, so BizApps / Dynamics / Power Platform has got some okay-ish search functionality that talks directly to the records, but I mean, when you explained this the first time, I'm still blown away by how this all fits together from the search API perspective. I mean, to me, like, purely because like, I haven't seen it before, it's totally magic. But yeah, and that's the part that I love about it. I mean, the app fits together really well, but it's the fact that you're using that. And that was new to me when you explained that. I was blown away, and I still am. I still think it's brilliant.
Well, I think this one, you notice there's not really any electronic forms as such. It does capture data, but it's, again, in a field scenario, you don't want to ask for a million things. I mean, if you ask someone if they've got a thought bubble and it's nothing more than a thought bubble, and if you ask them to fill in, any more than what you've got here, you're going to miss those opportunities. And so we're kind of accepting the fact that it's a thought bubble, and we leverage the business logic of Power Automate to go, well, if you've said these guys are the ones that you should be sending it to, and these are the topic areas, you've kind of got what you need. You can use other platforms to unpack things and do stuff. And so, for example, this could, and here's another couple of scenarios, and you can help me fill this in, because this is more your area than mine. Let's just say that you take these thought bubbles, you could actually put them into an entity and into a business process flow scenario, and you could probably end up, where I have the safety library, you could be using the knowledge management function within Dynamics and potentially getting stuff that way. So it doesn't preclude the sort of intersection of those worlds, but it's just one of those ones where I think, and we did discuss this, because I legitimately thought, if I was to do this in the in the Dataflex world, what would it look like? And the search was actually the bit that got me. Being able to pull that integrated search was actually the hard bit, and the documents. I mean, just from I think
it's not a CDS function. Yeah, it's not a CDS function, man. I mean, when you're looking at the common data service, you're so I always say to people, the common data service is not a document repository. Now, luckily, you can do it. I mean, it does store document. You can store images and things into Azure Blob, but then you miss the whole meta tagging concept. Like, I remember saying this to you at one point where I've seen people bend the rules to do this. So what they'll do is in CDS, Common Data Service, they'll create a custom entity, add a bunch of custom fields, add a document field. Then you can store your document field against the custom entity and tag it that way. Fine. Yep. I don't think that's the right thing to do.
It's a bit cumbersome. It is a bit cumbersome, isn't it?
Hugely, man. Like, I just say to people, look, if you're going to be doing document management, it's unstructured data, you need to put it in SharePoint. Like that for me is the right place.
Yep. I think, and also, this happens to be just the first example we're working with, and I've got others where, believe me, I had one client who was 100% cost focused, 100%, and they asked us to port an app into Power Apps that came from another low-code platform, probably it's on the quadrant, but one of the more obscure ones. But anyway, and as I was looking at this thing, I was sitting there thinking, this should have been a model-driven app. I was sort of having to cut corners and bend rules and all this sort of thing. But I think in this one, I suppose if we were going to distill it down, it accumulates. It's not data heavy. You're not talking about, thousands of records being loaded. We're not doing complex relationships. This is not like forms with subforms. It's a fairly basic data acquisition scenario. And the heart of it is this search experience. And as far as, and also because it's for a sort of construction project with thousands and thousands of people using it, the other factor there is 90% of the users of this thing aren't actually people in the organization that hosts this app. Because think of a construction project, the owner of the asset getting built or getting upgraded, there's probably like maybe, 100 of them tops. They're like they manage the contract. And then you've got all of these consortiums actually out there doing the work. 90% of the users are separate. So from a B2B scenario, this actually worked quite well because virtually every single one of those organizations have Office 365 now. So it was fairly easy, lightweight from a B2B. We could sort of open it up to users from other subcontractors without getting into sort of complexity. And again, remember, this was like 2 or 3 years ago. A lot of what you're seeing here was actually fundamentally done at that time. So at that time, we were still at CDS version 1, and it was still kind of in those old days of, different licensing kind of regime as well, right?
Yeah, I think, and from a licensing perspective, you're going to get shot in the foot if you do this in CDS. I think, in my opinion, I would never have built this in the Common Data Services from a platform perspective. I mean, you could have some modular stuff in the back end, but no, for me, this is definitely a SharePoint app for sure.
I think though, I see this in the future of this. So let's extrapolate this out and imagine, it's being used on a big project, right? $10 billion is not an insignificant amount of money, of course, but the overall infrastructure spend in the state that this is being done is actually like $100 billion. I mean, this is just one of a whole bunch of things happening. And then if you think of, even in the COVID sort of situation where we are now, governments invest in infrastructure. That's how to sort of create jobs and sort of stimulate the economy, that sort of thing. So if you then think, okay, what are we going to do with all of these insights? And if you made like a whole of industry solution to this, I think inevitably you would end up in the Common Data Service by definition, because you would end up, well, for a start, just the Power BI, the ability to do a lot more kind of real-time trend analysis, right, with that kind of capability, for a start. But also, as you scale it out to that kind of almost, whole of industry, whole of discipline kind of level, what insights are we getting for transport in general? I think at that point, that's when SharePoint would never cope with that,
No,
So
you it would grow up into, and that's what we found when we were delivering the Shack project in South Africa, is that like we needed the documentation and the metadata and the ability to do the collaboration, and that's what we did with SharePoint. But the thing we found, and this is pretty key, is that these guys had like loads of sites all over the place, so different sites. We had to have the referential integrity between site and person reporting against site and site case and all that kind of thing. And that was boss, man. Like we that was really a really great fit for, at that point, CRM. Now, their common data service has been democratized out of it. But the minute you get into high referential integrity between bits of data, that's where you need to start looking at CDS.
Absolutely.
And if I'm quite honest, like, I've looked at what SharePoint can do from that perspective, and dude, it just doesn't cut the mustard. Like, when I want to create these huge relational models, I can't do it there. But then at that same point, I will not use common data service as a collaborative platform. That's got to be Teams or SharePoint. It's just how it is.
So I reckon I completely agree with everything, because I've lived this, right? As I said, I was asked to do what I thought should have been a model-driven app in a Canvas paradigm. And so what do you do in that scenario? Well, you compensate by using collections a lot, right? Because you can at least have some internal efficiency if you can do things in memory. But anyone, if you're a SharePoint person watching this and you've never gone and linked to a common data service entity and just looked at how you can natively traverse relationships, just within the context of a gallery or something like that, the performance is phenomenal, like the difference. I did a lessons learned one. I don't think I told you this last time. I did a proof of concept lessons learned app. Someone had written one in SharePoint. And it had all sorts of delegation problems. And actually, the person who did it was a citizen dev, and it was a very impressive piece of work. I mean, notwithstanding delegation, I learned some stuff. I was like, wow, that was very cool. I like what you did there. But I ended up porting it into CDS. And not only did the delegation problems go away, I actually wrote a flow to fill it up full of about 10,000 random lessons just to see how it would handle the load. And it was super fast. And that's because the CDS connector that underpins the Power Apps it's not a connector in the same way. Like, I mean, people probably don't know this. Yes, it's a connector like everything else, but it talks natively to Common Data Service, where every other connector follows a framework, like a generic framework. And that, I guess, that abstraction and that reusability that you get for different data sources, you pay for it. There's a degree of fidelity you lose in terms of being able to do complex queries, join data in certain ways. As well as just latency, in terms of hitting a proxy, which does all its magic and, sends to the next thing. So, yeah, this thing was super, super fast by comparison. So, but here's the curveball. If you're working offline, and that's maybe our next topic. Well, if we're going to work on this, like, I've got another one to show you that sits in the perfect middle ground between CDS and SharePoint. So, I can either load it now, we can do it later. That's completely up to you. But I reckon
I've got 20 minutes, so like whatever works.
Yeah. Well, let's just talk general about the offline thing, because again, like, we'll sort of see what the feedback is from this one, and see what.
Yeah. But offline piece, dude.
So,
offline is a problem.
Yeah. So the minute. This is you tell me, I'll just state kind of my experience, and I could be totally naive or, lack of experience, so you can tell me. So when I have used the native CDS connector capability in Canvas apps, and by the way, folks, the framing here is Canvas apps. This is kind of specifically the framing we're talking here. It is phenomenally powerful. The minute, and that's because you can traverse relationships. You define a relationship in CDS between this, and literally natively within the thing, it's like just the dot notation. It just traverses transparently. And if you've ever done app in a day where you have to use lookups, in the SharePoint world, you make two galleries to do different lists, and in code in the app, you're going, hey, look up this list based on the value of what's in this gallery. And that's perfectly cool, and that's fine, but it just doesn't scale. But the minute you go offline, that's where things get interesting, because I've got this is, if you think of construction and the mining industry, which use apps like this, particularly exploration, where they might be in the middle of nowhere with a drill rig, and that drill rig has Wi-Fi and a satellite connection, and the minute you're within about 25 meters, you've walked away from that drill rig. I mean, you're literally, think of Australia, how big it is. You are in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
And so that's the scenario where we also operate in. And we have apps that actually are quite relational in terms of, sort of 3 or 4 levels of relational referential integrity. But because it's offline, we've had to sort of compromise, or we don't get the benefits of the relationship thing, and we've had to pull things into collections and do that lookup kind of thing anyway, so.
Paul, I experienced this. The first ever app I ever did in a production environment needed offline. And I've actually got 2 points I'm going to make here, right? So the first one is the offline point, where what we were doing was we were using Common Data Service as the backing, and they had leads and accounts and all sorts of things. So they said, oh, we want the whole thing to go offline. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, no problem. We can use the offline functionality. And they're like, oh, we want to be able to extract this and extract that. And I said, okay, wait, just think about this very quickly. So you want to be able to extract, you want to be able to look up an account record in an offline mode. And they were like, yeah. I said, okay, so now where do you think the data is coming from? Oh. So I'm like, exactly. You have to take that entire account list, put it in the collection. Sorry?
That's a damn big list, presumably.
Dude, it's huge. It's bonkers big. And so that's one record, right? Now think about this. So you've got accounts, you've got contacts, and you've got, I don't know, let's pick another thing like sites, okay? You're going to take all 3 of those, that entire database list, pull it offline and create lookups. Dude, it'll never happen. You will not get that right. As much as every organization wants to, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I tried this, and I thought to myself, like, okay, why, like, let's just give it a crack, right? And the app was horrendous, dude. It just struggled. Like it didn't, and also I couldn't make those references out to the other tables that I needed, because the thing is with CDS, with CDS, you can't just see it as like, oh, it's a relational data structure, because it is, but it's highly relational, which means that everything you do has got something linked to it all the time.
Yep.
Right? So you're going to go down this path of like trying to get a set of records, like one to many, many to one to many, etc. You can't take all of it offline. So what I did with this organization, I said, okay, we're going to take the very bare bones of the data that you need, and we're going to capture that. And then what we'll do is we'll put that offline, and then later on you can do the lookups.
Yes. Right? Yep. That's how I would do it. Yep.
And it worked well for them. The other point I want to make, and actually you mentioned something, and I've been chewing it in my head for a couple of minutes, but when you talked about using Flow, the one thing I love about what you've done with that application is that when you think about the fat-fingered technician and the way they're capturing information, it's got to be simple. And this is what I did with this app, right? So I did a very similar structure to you. But I think I made this analogy last time we spoke. Do you remember when Sony released their first ever MP3 player?
Yeah.
Like moons ago. It was awesome, but dude, it did everything. I mean, this thing did everything but make you toast. And no one bought it. Another organization released their MP3 player, and it had 3 buttons. But the power wasn't in the MP3 player. It was what was happening underneath that. You weren't paying for the iPod. You were paying for iTunes. That was where the big bucks was at that point, right? Now, this is like the application that you built and the one that I built previously, where I did most of my work underneath the covers to make sure that the information that was put in was really simple. And doing that offline was much easier for me.
Yes. Well, actually, you've hit the nail on the head that is worth exploring. Irrespective of SharePoint or irrespective of CDS, there was a ton of thinking and focus done on the underlying data architecture of the app that you just saw.
Yeah.
And I remember that, and actually this is, we'll talk about this. So I'll show the other app another day. But this is important because what I found was, and our whole delivery approach is, now you're sort of giving out the secret sauce, I suppose, in some ways, but our whole delivery approach was, I know that the data model was going to be wrong first time. Because you imagine you get a bunch of safety dudes. I mean, I was dealing with people who weren't discipline experts, and you put them in a room and you try and come up with, if you imagine saying to them, right, come up with a classification scheme for how a safety library would work. And like, that's a real abstract concept to do for someone that doesn't understand taxonomies and metadata and data models and all of that sort of stuff. Now, I learned a hard lesson on that a very long time ago, so we did not do that. I actually said to them, so 2 things. I assume the data model was wrong at the start. And I'll tell you how I do that in SharePoint in a bit, and you can say how we do it in CDS, right? Because I found what you said earlier extremely insightful last time we talked. But so number one, on the presumption that the data model is wrong for a start, I said to them, okay, I don't care about how you classify stuff. I brought up eBay, like I physically brought up eBay. on the, and I just searched, I made some searches on some things. And it wasn't so much what I was searching for, but I drew their attention to the facets down the left-hand side, because eBay is the ultimate search refiner. Because eBay is predicated on, you type something in, I gave you the example last time, Queen, right? You type in Queen, you'll get a whole bunch of facets. You get the monarch, you'll get Manchester, right? And you'll get the band, among other things.
Yes.
And so click, 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 boom. And so I said to the users, I said, I don't care about classification. I want the ultimate eBay experience for your safety content. You know, what do you need to have in that refiner to be able to, so it was from an outcome sort of perspective. That led to some suggestions on how we might classify it. And again, I knew it was wrong. Now, in the world of SharePoint, a cardinal mistake that a lot of people make is they start with this assumption that they've got to get the data model perfect up front. And I've seen many enterprise architect-y kind of information architect projects that try and solve this impossible problem of coming up with the perfect information architecture for a whole of organization perspective, which makes no sense to me, by the way. And in SharePoint, the constructs are different to what you'd sort of deal with. In SharePoint, the constructs are obviously lists, site columns, content types. It's more of an object-oriented than a relational kind of structure. But fundamentally, the principle's the same. If you design it with this idea that you've got the perfect structure up front and you use these constructs, you're locked in. You know, you're almost built in technical debt if you've made a mistake straight away. And I remember asking you, like, okay, how do you do that in CDS, right? Because CDS is the same thing. If you define all sorts of complex relationships and you got it wrong, and you got a problem. So yeah, the example that you see there, just for the SharePoint folks in the room, I'll tell you straight up, because people will disagree with it. I did not use site columns. I did not use content types whatsoever with that project until a year in, because it was only a year that I had the confidence that the data model was pretty solid, that we'd thrown every possible rock at it and it held up. And then I basically pivoted it into that more permanent structure. And so that meant if it was a site, if it was a list column, and if it was wrong, well, I just deleted it and made another one. You know, did a bit of my, you know, it was forgiving that way. And so, so that's my bottom up. What would you call that? Emergent data modeling? I don't know what you call it, but basically you start out, you just assume that you're wrong and you keep throwing rocks at it until you're not wrong. You know, you don't make the assumption that you're right until it holds up enough. That's kind of was the basis for that one.
Yeah, it's the throwing painted.
Yeah, so what's the CDS, or you know, what's the sort of the CDS view of that world in the Dynamics world? Because I said to you, and again, I'll repeat this for the benefit of the audience. I made an assumption. I don't know if I'm right or not, but in the Dynamics world, there is an existing data model there, right? You've got, you know, you buy the product, and I've had Dynamics consultants say to me, "Oh, we're very careful not to mess with it too much. You know, we try and minimize it," and I totally get it. But you've now got the world of CDS and Canvas. So you've got the engine of Dynamics, but now it's a free-for-all. And now you've got companies that can go, oh, I can make entities, I can do this. So Chris, how do we not make it? How do we avoid that technical debt the way I explained? And SharePoint has the same problem. So I've told you how I do it.
So for us, I would say the spice in the common data service is all about the relationships. Okay. The entities are effectively kind of just holders of data, right? So the way that I like to refer to the common data service is I call it the ice tray. People are like, that's a really weird example, but let me explain why. So you've got these pre-built structures that hold things. So much like an ice tray where you can pour water in, you can have lots of ice trays, okay? You can stack them. You can put them next to each other. It's really up to you. So you can create these little holders of data, which are quite useful, right? But the magic is how you link them together. Now, when you're building, what I found is that when I'm building solutions, I'm not afraid to create an entity because I know I can delete that entity at a later point. Okay, but with deleting an entity, you delete the data as well as the metadata. So that goes. So I create temporary entities, man. I test stuff, I break stuff. What I'll do when I start a project, like I did a first notification of loss project at one point, and if you don't know what that is, and if you talk to an insurer, what they'll tell you is that if you break your car or you break something in your house, you want to log a claim. You're not logging a claim, you're logging an FNOL, a first notification of loss. Okay. I didn't know how that worked, right? So I experimented with the data model quite a few times in the common data service, and I had first notification of loss as an entity, then I had claim, then I had person, then I had accounts, and then I had all these things linking up, and it was trial and error that I got it right. So I did effectively throw paint at the wall for a while, but I know I can delete entities.
Yep.
The real thing is around how you link them together, and the relationships are the magic parts.
Yep.
So what you can do is you can create like a one-to-many, a many-to-one, or a many-to-many, and you can link those entities up together. But if you break or sever that link, you lose that information that is contained within that link. Now, that's the thing, man. The more entities you have, the more normalized you make your data structure, the harder it will be for you to build that Canvas app. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
And the harder it will be for you to create your reports. So, like from a star schema perspective, think of it as like, one core entity with multiple entities on the side, and you having to do lookups every single time you want to capture data.
Yep.
It's going to be really difficult. Now, for model-driven apps, they're designed for that.
Yes.
Which is awesome. So a model-driven app is highly relational. So when you create a model-driven app, man, that is exactly what it's built for. But when you're building that Canvas app, you've got to be really careful now, because think about this and you'll, folks on the call also that are listening, you'll have a Canvas app with a form. Then you've got to start looking up to other entities on that form. So imagine you're taking that form offline, and that's going to be difficult.
Yep.
The next thing you're doing is you're also saying, okay, if I want to hop out from a one-to-many perspective, you're going to have galleries, which is a rectangle with an animated form or a component or another screen. And the more you do that, the more difficult it's going to be. Yep. From a BI reporting perspective as well, that poor person creating that report is also going to have to understand the data structure.
Yes.
So what I do, and this is just my theory, hey, is that first of all, I keep it as normal, as denormalized as I can in the beginning.
Yep.
And then I reach out to other entities when I need to, but I'm not afraid to sever the link, because I know that data in that other entity can live on its own.
Yep.
Now, that's the key. When you're designing, a lot of people say once you've designed your entity model, it's there for life. That's BS, right?
Can I ask you a question about that? Because that, of course, to my SharePoint biases, that's exactly how I would do it, right? So we've kind of arrived at a similar place by a different
yeah.
But so I do one thing, and I just wonder if this makes sense to do in CDS. So for SharePoint folks, I'll just quickly say to this. Every time I build anything that's going to be a Canvas app, I don't rely on SharePoint's internal ID field, because it's just an incrementing integer. I always make a GUID field, always. And that's actually what I use, because remember, SharePoint doesn't do relationships the same way. You still got to go, hey, look at, filter this gallery based on the value of this one, and I'll use GUIDs. But I'm not using lookups. I'm keeping it super simple. Now, the reason I do that is, among many other things, which will be a whole topic in itself, but I can now pick up that data and I can move it to a different SharePoint, because people screw the migrations. So many people don't do the migrations wrong, and the indexes get screwed. And if your index is based on integers, then your whole integrity is basically shot. So it actually helps me for migrations. I can pick up this data and move it, because actually my true authoritative column is this GUID, which is kind of the equivalent of a bit the way CDS works. And by the way, it's also good because I can migrate it to CDS, because that's the fundamental premise of how CDS works. Now, that's a little bit of a sort of prelude, because my question to you is this. If I am not sure of the data model yet, and I don't want the lock-in of relationships, there's no harm in just using kind of the Canvas app way and going, hey, I keep them unrelated and I'll look up this one based on the value of this one. So you do it. It's not as sexy as you'd imagine, but if the end in mind is the relational model, if you do it that way, you don't have that lock-in that you talked about, right? You'd be able to change things, and you'd be able to have a bit of an emergent kind of data model, and you go, no, this is holding up really well. We've been at it for a few months. Now we flip it, lock in the relationships, performance suddenly shoots up in terms of the Canvas app, and you do it, say, that way. Does that make sense to you?
Close. Yeah, I can't see why not, man. I mean, I've done that before. It's not the right way to do it all the time, but if you're looking for a way to understand how this is all going to link together, sure. I love that concept, actually. I mean, before, what we used to do, and this is, like I said, previously we've done some naughty stuff with Dynamics, and even still now. But yeah, you can create referential fields that just look at each other and talk to one another, like IDs or sort of secondary keys, I guess. And then, just link them that way. We do data imports like that. It's not always because the GUID comes naturally with a common data service every time you create a record.
Yes.
And even in many-to-many relationships, there's a subtable that you don't know about. When I'm linking like multiple contacts, multiple accounts, that subtable gets created that you never see. That basically has its own GUID with two GUIDs being brought together. Like, absolutely, I would definitely suggest that if you're not entirely sure, and then later move on to like thinking, okay, well, if these tables are linking up, then sure, we'll create the actual referential integrity between the two using the one-to-many or however you'd like.
Yeah, well, I think it sort of leads to another bit of a dodgy hypothesis I have that I've never tested. So it's therefore it's really more opinion than fact. But I think the world of the Office folks is much more, you'll break relational rules because you have to, based on the limitations of SharePoint, right? Because it's more an object type database than a relational one. Whereas in the Dynamics world, you're so used to the relational kind of way, and I think both of them have quite different delivery mechanisms. You know, in the Dynamics world, a lot of upfront focus on the data model, because if you get it wrong, it hurts you later. The same thing is with SharePoint as well, absolutely. And we talked about how you can arrive at that. But I think you probably find the Office folks have, well, there's plenty of atrocities on both sides in terms of implementation. The Office folks are probably more amenable to bending the rules potentially. I don't know. Yeah, again, hypothesis. I could be wrong, but or they just had to by definition. And so because certainly I've seen people on sort of the like Dynamics world say, you know, oh, I would never do it that way. That just sort of offends my sensibilities of a data modeler. And I'm like, well, I don't really have any choice because, you know, delegation kind of works that way and I just have to do this workaround. So, yeah, you know, do you if I'm wrong, you can feel free to tell me I'm wrong. You don't have to be.
No, I don't think you are. Oh man, you know, I'll tell you what. I've spent a lot of time on these extensive data model designs, and it never. You know what? You can spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure something out. But like you said, you know, it is sort of a design by build type thing. So you're constantly changing things.
Yeah.
But I think as long as people are prepared to understand that you are going to bend the rules, and it's not always going to be the way you think it is, like then you're more open to it. And what I've found, you know, I think working for Microsoft has actually been really good, because I've gotten to work with some modern workplace partners and some Azure partners and BizApps partners. And like the structure and the way they do things is quite interesting. And as you said, you know, the M365 folk are more kind of obliged to try something out and say, okay, well, this doesn't really cut the mustard, and do something else. Whereas the BizApps folks are like hard and fast, like this is how we do things. And it goes into this box like this, and that's it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've had to reteach myself and learn the Office way rather than the BizApps way, because with CDS, you do have the flexibility there to change things.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're completely reliant on the first party application layer like you are in Dynamics.
Yeah.
And that's the part I love, right? So yeah, I think from that perspective, yeah, you have to reteach your brain, and you have to train your brain to understand that this is a build by design. No, it's not always build by design, but it's build by experience with the customer. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It makes perfect sense to me, just because I think, you know, people are used to the paradigm that they're delivered stuff in. So imagine you just know nothing but model driven. That's your world, right?
Yeah.
Then, therefore, by definition, there's a whole bunch of stuff you're doing in the back room on whiteboards and just basically that kind of data model architecture, you know, before you ever show it to a user. Whereas in a Canvas app, you've not even got it saving anything yet before you're showing it to a user. You know, the great strength of the fact that you can
like that,
you know, tacit kind of experience, and rather than write a big requirement specification and data model, you've already kind of got a sense of how it looks like. So, you know, when Microsoft 2 or 3 years ago, I think when Charles Lamana said, you know, the model driven, we're going to unify the model driven and the Canvas driven worlds. It's one of those ones that intellectually makes sense, but the reality is they are actually two different paradigms, and it's trying to kind of like unify the laws of physics. It's like the quantum and the standard model, right? But I think yeah, from this conversation, what I'm hearing is, irrespective of the underlying data structure you start with, if you don't know the result yet, if you can't be 100% cause and effect, like if you do it this way, you will get this result. If you don't know that yet, and most innovation projects or most projects that require people to change their behaviors or, you know, a new process, by definition, you don't, then don't lock yourself in. Don't come up with the perfect data model, or don't delude yourself. And you know, again, SharePoint purists, but if you think that, you know, content types, site columns and term sets, you're going to get it right first time, and you know, unleash that onto your organization, you probably find that that's not going to work out so well for you.
Oh, dude, totally, Paul. I really think that. So my theory is, we have to train our customers to rethink the way that they're doing things.
Yep.
And we have to rethink the way we're doing things. We're not locked in anymore. It's not all about the strict delivery, like I've drawn this on a whiteboard and this is how it is now. It's very much. I know that people throw this word around a lot, and I'm not doing it on purpose, but it is very agile, and it is very sort of, you have to get down with the fact that, like, you are going to be changing things. But also, I think that we have to be open with the people that we're building for. You know, this isn't like you're putting, the way that I see it, random example, right? So my sweet blue Lego spaceship, okay, that's been destroyed by my children, okay?
Yes.
I can rip this apart and I can rebuild this at any point. But dude, the platform is still Lego. It's still reliable. And that's the part that I love about it, right? So it doesn't matter what I build. I've still got my Lego. I've still got my platform.
Yeah. You know what the metaphor is? If you put the relationships in, you super glued some of those parts.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. and that's really scary right now. You could rip them apart, but man, it's going to be painful.
Yeah, but I think if you extend it, here's the way I look at it, right? So that if it turns out that Lego ship of yours is working really well and it hasn't got any major faults, it's holding up really well, then it's justified to super glue it because you've got the body of evidence that it makes sense that you can actually rely on that foundation. And that's, in effect, how I kind of reconcile the model-driven and the canvas world. I think life starts out as a canvas app because most of the time some dude has a thought bubble and goes, gee, this could be a good idea. And it could be a citizen, it could be the worst thing ever. But, hey, someone else looks at it and goes, damn, that's a pretty damn good idea. I can see the value you're trying to capture there. And so you don't suddenly unleash the enterprise architects on people at that stage because that's the best way to kill innovation. So you actually work with that, right? And so if that means using SharePoint and a list and some, dodgy model that actually proves that there's some serious value there and you start to develop a roadmap for what this will look like, you'll inevitably end up in the common data service. I think just by virtue of that, you know what I mean? Like every step of the way, if you're proving value, then your ambition grows and then you're justified in now taking that, further degree of rigor in data modeling. And if it means you have to pull some bits apart, then that's fine because the value justifies it because you've got to that sort of point. That for me is, kind of the way you, I guess it's almost like the perfect is the enemy of the good. Do you know what I mean? Like it's.
I remember you telling me this, man. I still really like that saying, and actually I used it the other day. It's kind of like, I always feel that something, so random example, right? My sister's an artist, okay, and she loves painting things and she loves creating things and she's a writer as well. And the other day I asked her if I could read the first copy of her book and she said, no, it's not finished. And I'm like, dude, it's never going to be finished. Stop striving for perfection because you're never going to be happy with it. But you sometimes need to just admit the fact that you've built something awesome. Your brain will want to change things and it always will. But that's the best thing about Power Platform is you can add on more if you need.
Oh, yes. And I think also everything we've discussed, it's all of both and, because you can imagine if you took that knowledge management example and you took it to its nth degree, then you could end up with a pretty impressive data lake, which has a whole bunch of insights from all sorts of things that you're making use of that's underpinned by the common data service that's fed from field insights from people sitting there actually sort of capturing this stuff, taking photos, tagging, using Teams, that kind of level. So that's absolutely true. And I suppose that's really the moral of the story. There's more to life than just looking at two columns and going, we should use this one or this one because here's the criteria. Always start with the use case. And in fact, start with one. It's okay because if you spend a week on one and you realize that you need to move to the other one, well, there's two things. You've actually probably proven a few things because it's been in the hands of your users because of the fact that you can share this stuff. You've probably learned a few things along the way that actually, the way I thought about it is probably not quite right because user feedback has shown me a few sort of, signals are emerging for me that, maybe we should do it this way. So, and that's actually a really key thing about the Power Platform. Another piece of advice I would give that at the very start, literally 4 years ago it is now because it was beta at the time when I used it and I wrote my first ever app and I handed it to someone and it was to do with lessons learned. I said, what do you think? At the time, he basically goes, wasn't interested in what I showed him whatsoever. He connected the dots to something else. He actually goes, could you use this for, inspecting cranes? Oh, and I was like, yeah. And I remember making a mental note of that. I thought, that's interesting. Didn't have to, made his own connection. That's good. But he actually said to me, is platform any good? And I was honest at the time. I said, I actually don't know. But if you give me 5 days, we will find out. And so what happened was he gave me 5 days to basically write something. And this is super early days, right? So no common data service, no model, nothing. And so stuck it into SharePoint, wrote him an app. Basically, he gave it back. And then we decided that, yes, that there was enough value there to justify 10 days worth of further investigation. And so, and here was our rationale. Even if we hit that toll gate and went, no, this isn't working, there's a fundamental issue here. You can literally go, fine, I can give you the prototype and hand it to grown-up devs, and they can go and do a bespoke app in React or some JavaScript framework. And you don't have to write a big requirement spec, because I can literally go, you just build me this, here's the app, and you just make that bespoke, and solve this particular problem. So for us, it was low risk, because you were literally validating and stress testing your requirements just by virtue of doing the app. So once you frame it that way, it's literally, you go, so you could literally say to an organization, look, just use it as a prototyping tool. If your policy is to go bespoke, fine.
Yeah, Azure partners do that all the time. I've got a load of Azure partners that I work with that use Power Apps or Canvas apps in particular as a mechanism to try out. So they'll have Xamarin or React or something.
Yep.
There'll be stuff there, and they'll be like, oh, I wonder if this is going to work. So they'll probably use it as a wireframing tool. I'm like,
and that's why yeah, and you mentioned wireframing. That's important. I actually think it's probably the ultimate design thinking tool. I've run workshops where instead of wireframing, I've just built screens using Canvas apps for them for that reason. But that's the key thing. But the thing is, anyone watching this that is yet to be convinced, for example, not only is it a great prototyping tool, it actually probably a fair chunk of the time is a damn good production tool. So, and again, if you get to that inflection point where you go, okay, that actually went really well, then just get more ambitious and then spend another 5 days. And basically you get to that. Each time your skill level grows, your ambition grows, your capacity grows, and next thing, you've actually got a good handle on the platform. You've got a good instinct on where its strengths and weaknesses are. And when a certain approach applies really well, that's, and it seems to me just a really low risk way of actually, delivering.
Cheap. It's not expensive.
Exactly right.
You know something interesting, Matt. So like when I started doing Canvas apps, because originally coming from the model-driven app world, it was quite tough to get into, and I'm still not like brilliant on the expressions and things, but I'm learning, And when I started doing it, I'm like, wait, I can build an app in like literally 5 minutes and have it working and get data from people. So now what I do is I just spin them up randomly. Obviously, I ditch them once I've got the data if I don't need it again.
Yep.
So I don't create App Armageddon. But yeah, if I've got an event or I want to do something internally, like I ran a thing called Hack at Speed. I created an internal little app, little quick one, right? I didn't need it for anything else. Managed to get the data from all the people. I didn't need the app anymore because I knew I could recreate it. Ditched the app, got the data, did the reporting, and I was done.
Yep.
Literally within an hour.
Yep. That little story I started with, which was the guy saying to me, can this thing be used for audit cranes? So that was one of the first use cases I wrote. I ended up doing one for vehicles, for cranes, for dam walls, you name it. We did an audit app, and eventually my daughter and I decided, when I first taught her, I said, okay, I'm doing enough of these, you and I, and this is again going back to that, the data model is already starting to suggest itself because we'd implemented several dozen use cases. Being able to go, okay, if we were going to do this generically, what would it look like? So we whiteboarded it out and came up with a data model, and we put it out there. And as you would expect, the data model was wrong, but we actually got pretty far and we got a nice app. Now, here's what's interesting about that though. Fast forward 3 years, now we have a really awesome data model and a very powerful app that does all sorts of things in the safety and asset management space. But again, just that kind of working out loud piece, someone contacted us from the US who watched a video that my daughter and I did from 2.5 years ago. Yeah. He got inspired to learn this stuff. She was 18 at the time. She wasn't even interested in any of this. She was a student. But because she did, he was like, damn it, I can do this too. And he ended up, now he is a program manager, has like 1,000 auditors that sort of he's responsible for. He's running a whole series of apps, and he's saving his organization $2 to $3 million annually. All because he saw what we'd done. And in fact, I remember that was the bit that was funny. I actually said to him, she was a starving student at the time, my daughter. So I said, if you paid her $50, she would not only give you the app, she'll deploy it for you, give her a user ID. And that's literally what was done. They gave her a temporary ID, she deployed it, got her $50, and how's that for an ROI? 3 years later, they're saving that. So, but it's we've been living that story, you see. So we have this audit app that you've thrown every possible scenario at it, and we still get curveballs to this day. And we go back to the data model and we reinvest and we go again. So, but if we tried to solve every problem at the start with that sort of lock-in, it would have been such difficulty for us to revisit and sort of tear it apart and put it back together again.
I think that's a good point, Paul, because one of the things I've started to see is that one of the reasons I love the Power Platform is that when you're looking at organizations, if they, and I'm going to throw a Calvin and Hobbes term in here, if they aren't transformographying the way they're doing things all the time, I think that it's the wrong thing. So if you look, here's a crazy story, right? So if you look at 1999, when the clock was going to tick over and everyone lit bin fires on the road and started digging holes and holding baked
I'm old enough to be in IT at that point, so yes.
Yeah. I kind of feel like, there are a lot of organizations that still didn't transform. But with the Power Platform, I love the story because it gives you the opportunity with an org to constantly change. So it's not always going to be that app that they use. But that's cool because you've still got the data structure. Or even if you don't have the data structure, you've got other things that live underneath there that you can use later on in other apps. So you're not locked into this on-prem horrendous thing that you're using all the time, or even into a SaaS solution. You've got this platform. It's like the Lego example I gave you. I can rip this spaceship apart and build a castle if I want to. It's still the same platform, and that's what I love about it, man. We've got this opportunity to do all this change or apply all this change within orgs really quickly, and you've given me proof of that already. That's what I love about it. So I'm happy that I work in the Power Platform because whether now it might be SharePoint and CDS, in 2 years' time it might be Cosmos DB.
Yeah,
who knows?
Yeah.
But I'm happy with the fact that we've got the platform.
Yeah. Oh, look, I've never been so unencumbered in my career, like literally in 30 years, never been so unencumbered. I actually think SharePoint, given SharePoint's heritage, it was pretty innovative for its time because I was pre-SharePoint, I was a document management guy, Documentum and PC Docs and these enterprise tools. So I came into SharePoint and at the time, it was the low-code app of that era, the mid-2000s, kind of 2007. And it was the term didn't exist, but it was the citizen app. People could build sites and drop on web parts and all that. And so, and if Power Apps is just almost the natural evolution of where that's going. And I think actually Brian Dang said this, I remember, and I thought it was pretty insightful that websites used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to build. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, particularly if it was a SharePoint one, which is always a dumb idea, but that's another story. But now you go to WordPress or Sitecore and there's all these modules and, grandma can pretty much set up a site with a shopping cart and a, registration thing and all that, click, click, click. I think these platforms mean apps are on that same trajectory. So yes. Definitely. The paradigm of big projects, lots of upfront requirements, and is more or less being supplanted. This idea of going test the fundamental premise of what you want to do. You've got this wonderful idea; it's going to be awesome. Okay, take the number one thing that would make it awesome. Can we prove that in a week? And just using some dodgy ass SharePoint list or some entity that is totally wrong. Yes, sweet. Okay, so what's the next kind of key premise, or what's the key risk we got to do? And let's spend a week doing that. And it's almost you can now validate assumptions and test value propositions so much quicker. And you have all these toll gates that literally you've always got that point where you can stop and go stop, but you've still captured value at every toll gate because of the fact that you've got a functioning prototype that's been shared and validated by users, right? So
spot on.
That design approach is the future, and I think the old idea of you get your BA, your project manager, the BA is the messenger boy that sort of goes and gets requirements, and the project manager makes sure, and then the devs sort of code. That's a fundamentally different thing now. It's much more of an Imagineering kind of process with wireframes and canvas apps. And again, data model comes in at a certain point where it makes sense to, once you've validated the core value that you're trying to capture. Yeah.
Spot on, man. Spot on. Yeah. I think that in the world we are in now, it's changed a lot. And one of the scary things that I'm watching happening is that there's some people not catching up, which is worrying me slightly. But unfortunately, Times are changing.
The IT industry has always had a lot of pathology in various forms, but you know, I actually understand it. I actually do understand it. And I used to be a security guy. I don't know if I ever told you that. I was a cybersecurity guy before SharePoint, and so that meant my entire world was about mitigating risk. And anything that was an unknown to me was a risk. And therefore, if you ask me a question, my default answer was very likely no. And so, and in fact, I ended up getting out of security because I ended up finding I was almost drifting into conspiracy theory conversations with even more paranoid security people. If this would happen and the moon was in this position and a plane was flying over the sky at this point, this could happen. And so I sort of moved out of there. But you can actually understand the IT industry was the custodian for years and years and years of key critical infrastructure, and any unknowns meant downtime, and any downtime meant you get a page at 2 a.m. and it was on you to fix, and it was usually something that wasn't your doing. And I used to feel, I'd get one of those, I'd feel physically sick, you know. So it was I understand where the risk aversion comes from. And it's going to take, you mentioned it earlier about unlearning, you know, reprogramming your brain. That takes a while. You know, if you've lived in that paradigm for 20, you know, that's been the status quo for such a long time. It takes a while to get used to the fact that, wait, it's being hosted now. Someone else is doing, you know, you can't just sort of unlearn that reaction. It's just kind of...
It's hard, man. I'll tell you what, when I used to be a Delphi programmer, and I used to do a lot of stuff on Delphi. And that. Yeah, man. I used to write...
How old are you? I even know what it is. Okay, can I just say one thing before you go on? I coded Dataflex.
No.
In 1991, I coded Dataflex. So when they used that name, I was like, Dataflex. And then I Wikipedia. I was like, wait, this still exists. I have no memory of it, by the way. It was in the era of Clipper and Dataflex. Anyway, go on. I just thought I'd have to tell you that.
We are proper nerds. Yeah, it was... I remember writing stuff in Delphi and connecting it to Interbase version 7. And yeah, man, I remember having a antivirus tool that would scan the database and literally trash the whole thing. And I would have all sorts of referential errors and key errors and bugs, and man, it was horrible. And like,
so there's a lesson there for governance people, by the way, because in cybersecurity, at least when I did it, there's a certification called CISSP, and the foundation of that certification is the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. And so basically, that example, someone in the name of risk management has just trashed the I and the A of that particular thing, right? And so a lot of governance efforts end up becoming self-defeating. So in the name of governance, people do stuff that undermine governance. And so, for example, you know, defaulting to turning stuff off, that just encourages shadow IT, you know, and that's just a simple example. But, you know, there's just so many examples where people do stuff in the name of risk management, and then turns out it's actually more of a risk the way they did it. The most recent example, I suppose, is pre-COVID. Many organizations were totally not structured to work from home. You had to VPN in, you had to use Citrix, you know, it was all super, you know, and it was usually some old virtual machine, Windows 7. And then you imagine now your entire organization has to use that service. And so suddenly, from a risk point of view, actually it's costing you money because the efficiency of your workforce has gone down. And so again, but it was still in the name, it was with best of intent in the name of risk management. So,
man, yeah. I was talking to somebody yesterday about this. Actually, we were talking about the whole better a governed free market you know than a black market you don't know discussion, and around shadow IT, and that came up, and they were kind of saying like, where's the line? Like, where do you stop and where do you start? And I'm like, look, you know, I don't know. If I'm honest, for me, you know, you have to figure that out yourself, and it's always dependent on the customer. It's never ever going to be the same anywhere you go. It's always going to be different. Like how many rules do you put in? I often get asked on the platform, they say to me, you know, do you just let citizen developers go wild? And I'm like, well, why not? You know, oh, but our data is at risk. I'm like, yeah, but that's your fault because you don't respect your data. If you respect your data, everything's fine, but people freak out about that.
So actually, we'll use that as a topic of another session. I've done a lot of governance around the guardrails for citizen developers. and
Oh,
how
you
you
were
can
working
leverage
with
the platform
Manuela,
for
weren't
that.
you? Yeah.
Sorry.
You were working with Manuela on a bunch of COE stuff, weren't you?
Oh, yes, I work very closely with her. So a lot of the stuff in COE, for those who haven't seen the COE, oh my goodness, SharePoint people, if you had that level of analytic data for decision making, but from a governance point of view, you got everything you need to govern that platform. Every app that's running, every maker that's using it, every connection they're using, every flow they're using, performance, throughput, volume, all of those things. You have that in Power BI, and not only that, you can take action because we've made Power Apps that go into Power BI so that you can sort of do that. So, no, I mean, really governance, if you don't have analytics with governance, it's kind of just your opinion, So I think, again, to be fair on security folks, to be fair on custodians of IT stuff, if you don't have the visibility of what's going on, then it's an unknown unknown, and it makes perfect sense to go, well, if I don't know about it, it could be risky, and it could bite us. So let's just lock it down. But yeah, if you haven't seen COE, you really should have a look at it, because the COE is a set of flows, dashboards, apps. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that will give you everything you need to manage the platform. But not only that, I've got clients that are asking me to make COE for Teams, and COE for SharePoint, and COE for Groups, and COE for Planner. So I've extended those entities into that kind of world now. So whether Manuela can pick that stuff up because it bleeds into other areas of Microsoft, I don't know. But COE, it does more than it knows. It gives you what you need for decision making, but it helps IT departments understand how the platform works, and they can tweak it for their specific needs. And then you end up getting other sections of the business going, I want that, because it's just, cybersecurity came to me and said, I want to know every custom connector and every flow that has a HTTP endpoint. And I was like, okay, cool. Here's the Power BI dashboard that has that right here. Would you like a flow that delivers it to you via an email? I'll send it to you once a month. So that's what COE is all about. And so, yeah, I work very closely with her on that sort of stuff for that exact reason.
I think we should do a session on that, because I'm still learning about how all the bits and pieces fit together, but it's one of the primary things that I do with partners. So we always talk about excellence and governance and compliance and that. And yeah, man, I mean, yesterday I did a day loss prevention demo, and it's just fun in my head, but it appears boring to others. So if we can, I reckon we need to explain to people that it's not just governance is a sucky thing to talk about, but actually it's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely important topic. So now we'll add that to the list. I've got another, like I said, I've got another app to show you. I led with an app that I know is kind of office friendly. So in the interest of fairness, now I've got to be careful, because some apps I can't show you. I can only talk about them. I can only show you the ones that I can. But maybe another one is, if you can, we'll find an app that you can pull up that we can go, just don't ever try this in SharePoint. It just makes no sense. That would be
and I think we need to do that. I think we need to make a direct comparison between, this app for CDS won't work in SharePoint, and this app for SharePoint shouldn't be in CDS.
That's it. I think what we do is we say to organizations where, look, if you're going to be really stingy and you don't want to pay for it, well, this is how you would do it, but this is where your limitations are. And so that way people can at least understand sort of where the boundaries are a bit more tacitly than just what a a flow chart might tell them.
Totally cool, man. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'm just trying to run through. I might have a couple of things I can show you as well. We can do an app.
But look, I will show you one next time. I'm going to show you an app that's an audit app. We're going to take apart the Universal Audit app in a bit more detail than I've otherwise done. And because I think that one is extremely amenable to the Common Data Service. In fact, I am porting it currently to the Common Data Service just for scalability purposes. But it's a good example of how far, I suppose what it shows you is how far you can push SharePoint and when you're okay to and when you shouldn't. So we can use that to maybe drill down a bit more on when to, where SharePoint starts to not become the right tool.
Yeah, I'd be keen to learn about that as well, actually. So what are the limits?
All right, cool.
Yeah, awesome.
Right.
Awesome.
When you get back from holidays, it's a date.
Rock and roll, my friend. I'll make it on a Friday so I can drink beer.
Yes, absolutely. Well, actually, I was talking too much. I've still got half of this one to go.
Oh man, I smashed my 0%. I've got another one though. But yeah, I've got to go to gym. So if I drink beer now, it's just going to end up me in the backyard making a barbecue.
Well, great talking to you as always.
Oh man, you too. I love it.
We'll throw up another one or toss that around next time.
Rock and roll, my friend. Yeah, that was great, Paul. Honestly, I love chatting to you, man.
All right. Yeah, likewise. Cool.
Alrighty, my man. You keep
right.
well. Have a great weekend, and yeah, party hard.
Yeah, you too. All right. See ya.
Cheers, dude.